How's it going, guys? It's Rickster with Cure Audio. Today I'm going to be showing you how to make those classic brostep, Skrillex style, doofy dubstep snares. And before I really get into like the quite simple technique of doing these, I'd figure I'd mention that I think it's important for when you're like remaking sounds to know how to like analyze what you're hearing and kind of go about achieving that. So I pulled in these Skrillex snares that were ripped from songs. This was a snare he used on quite a lot of records. And then this is a rip of the Scary Monsters snare. And already you can kind of see they both have similarities. While this one, they both have this kind of very noisy section right here. And that's the transient of the snare. Before the main kind of doofy body layer of the snare comes in. It's very like sign shaped, you know? And then the first one kind of almost immediately fades into white noise, while the Scary Monsters one doesn't. The body of it doesn't really fade out nearly as much as this one. You know, and I think stuff like this can give quite like important insights, like knowing, you know, that if you were to drag in a more like acoustic snare, like a 707, just off the bat. You know, you'd end up, this has this kind of main sign shape at the very beginning of the snare. So Skrillex did say multiple times in multiple interviews that the way he'd make his snares was using 909s. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and grab a 909 just from stock Ableton. Yeah, just right here in the default core library. I'm going to pick one that has a decent amount of kind of high end to it. And so there's a couple things we're going to want to do now. There's kind of three main components to most drum sounds. Is you have the main transient, which is the beginning kind of punch click of the sound. You have the body, which is kind of the tonal center, I guess, of the sound. And then you have the tail, which is kind of any extra sparkle that might be layered on the sound. Like kind of decays, like reverb decays or whatever. So in the snare, you're typically going to have like this kind of white noise-ish tail, this main sign-shaped body, and then transient can really be anything, you know? So what I do to go about making this snare look like this is first what I'm going to do is I'm going to compress it, because you can see these are much more compressed. These are fat snares. So if I just go and you could throw an OTT on it. Doesn't sound great because of how strong OTT is, but we can make it work a little more. If you turn up the time on OTT, you can kind of impart more of a snap to it. While turning it down, you kind of lose the snap, and eventually you'll start to distort the sound because your compressor will be reacting too quickly and start wave folding. But so we take this, and then you can see here that it's kind of saturating here. You know, this isn't a very like perfectly shaped sine wave. And so you can just use the stock Ableton saturator, just push it till you start getting a nice little like warmth to it. But you can hear it's like getting kind of buzzy. And the reason for that is because there's a lot of low end in this snare in the 909. You can see down here, there's a lot. So I'm just going to go and just put a pretty gentle high pass, because you don't want to roll off too much low end. You'll end up pulling like punch away from the actual snare. And then this little section right here I find quite annoying. And then I'm going to boost this to add a little extra air. And you know what? I'm going to also put a little bit of reverb. I'm going to set the size pretty small, the decay pretty short, turn the pre-delay up, and then kind of add a little extra space in the high end, essentially. So now what I'm going to do, maybe pull the high end back a little bit more. And now I'm going to put a pretty healthy peak right there. So now if we freeze this and we drag this to a new channel, you can already see the snare is getting much kind of closer to the region we want to be. So now for a transient, like I said, you can use white noise. I have friends who will just straight up take the snare and pitch it up a bunch and EQ it to be its own transient. You know, I'm just going to take another stock Ableton drum sample and I'm just going to drag in like a clap. You know, it doesn't really matter because it's going to be so kind of short and unrecognizable that it doesn't really matter. But then you can go and you can line it up with the actual original snare. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to limit this so I can really push this like kind of flat the way they are here. And then I'm also going to fade in the main body of this because you can see it doesn't come in until after the transient's kind of over. So I'm just going to just do that. So it doesn't sound great right now, but we're gonna get there. Next, we're gonna want a tail because I don't really like how short and like airy this is. I'm also gonna roll off the low end on this transient just to really make sure I'm adding specifically what I want from this transient. You could even saturate stuff. Saturation will definitely add like a lot of nice push to the sound. And then for a tail, you can use a China sample. You could use EQ'd white noise. Really kind of whatever you'd like. You could layer, this is the point where now you could layer in other drum sounds. Like if you take like an acoustic snare, and so you can get kind of more of those really odd harmonics in like in the middle of the spectrum. Like if you were to go get a, like a Ludwig or something from the stock Ableton library. Again, it doesn't really matter what you use as long as you kind of know what you're going for in the end. I think it's called the LDW snare. Yeah, like that has a lot of these like cool, interesting upper mid harmonics. And just for an example, the way I'd kind of try to place it with the snare is you want those right there to cut through. So you could then go and you could fade it in. You know, you could really approach this however you'd like. Just make sure if you're leaving the original fundamental of if you're layering snares and they're kind of tuned the same, just make sure you're not getting any phase cancellations where in one snare the kind of main sine shape is doing the opposite of the other one, because when you add them together, they're going to cancel out and you're going to lose a lot of that weight of the snare. So for a tail, I'm just going to make this easy. I'm going to use the classic China sample from the Legacy Live 8 library. Just the session dry. I'm just going to put a little fade on it. And I'm going to go and I'm going to put just like a gentle low cut. Let the air poke through. Maybe shift it forward like this and add a fade. Of course, you can pitch this up. Doesn't really matter. You can, like I'm saying, you can approach this however you'd like. And then, of course, you can group these sounds together now, and you can compress them. You could add another OTT. Make sure you're really pushing forward the elements of the snare you like the main body of it. Maybe you can bake more reverb into the sample. I know a lot of people do that. Maybe put it before the compressor. And then last but not least, put a little bit of soft clipping on it just to really round out the drum. And now we can resample this to a new channel. And we got a little classic little dubstep snare. Of course, now you can EQ this now to fit in your own songs. You can throw frequency shifters on it. You can do really whatever you'd like.